Hello, thanks for joining us. This presentation will focus on how we communicate about invasive insects in the news media, with a focus on the emerald ash borer. My name is Clarke, and I'm assistant professor at the University of Florida. This project is in collaboration with Dr. Laura Roman. She's at the U.S. Forest Service Philadelphia Field Station, and Dr. Tenley Conway at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. This project was done partly while I was a postdoc at Villanova University, and so I extend a special thanks to the Department of Geography and Environment and to the librarians at Falvey Memorial Library. We also thank Molly and Maggie for their help with intercoder reliability and Rich Howard for his feedback during the early stages of this study. We also thank the University of Florida Open Access Publishing Fund. Speaking of open access, our article was recently published in June of this year, so please go ahead and read it and cite it. As you can tell, right, this presentation is fairly short, and so the article goes in much more depth about all of these different framings and what we took away from this study. So, some background about emerald ash borer in the US. Emerald ash borer is native to parts of Asia and Russia and was first discovered in the country in around 2002 in Detroit, Michigan. It is the most expensive and ecologically disruptive insect to date, feeding primarily on ash trees, most of which are very susceptible to EAB. In fact, the beetle has killed over 99% of ash trees in certain parts of the country, for example in parts of Michigan and Ohio, causing the deaths of more than 10 million ash trees across the country so far. Emerald ash borer is particularly costly for urban areas, partly because within urban areas, many of the urban tree species comprise ash trees. For example, in some US cities, it's said that over 20% of the urban tree canopy is made up of ash trees. In addition to that, it is costing municipal budgets, right, an increase of over $280 million, and is set to increase or exceed rather $12 billion by the end of this year in just management costs. So again, EAB was first discovered in 2002 in Michigan and has since spread to many other states within the country. And this map shows some of those areas. So as we see the spread of emerald ash borer across the country, we wanted to know, how does the media communicate to the public about this species? And this is particularly important because emerald ash borer is spread primarily through human activities like camping, transporting wood products across county and state lines, etc. In addition to that, the media can also shape public perception. It can increase awareness about the topic, and it can also influence people's opinion and how they view the reality of the situation. More specifically, we wanted to look at what are the key framings used to report about EAB in the news, including whose voices are represented, what are the calls to action for the public, and overall looking at what are some ways that we can better engage the public in EAB management using the news media. To answer this question, we did a content analysis of newspaper articles published in the continental US between 2002 and 2017. More specifically, this research was done in 3 phases. So in the first phase, we developed a codebook using both inductive and deductive methods. We then downloaded news articles using the search term emerald ash borer EAB using Nexus Uni, and this initial search produced 1,483 articles after, of course, controlling for continental US and the timeline between 2002 and 2017. In the second phase, we removed all duplicate articles manually. We then read through articles and removed any relevant ones, for example, articles which only mentioned EAB in one sentence. For example, saying EAB will be discussed at the next board meeting. We would have removed that article. For intercoder reliability, each co-author independently read 20 articles and agreed on framing and the final codebook. In the final phase, the primary author, which is me, read 924 articles that were included in the final section. And these articles were uploaded and coded using in vivo. So some of our results very briefly. So what are the key framings used to report about EAB? So to answer this question, we used framing theory. And framing theory refers to the process by which people develop a particular conceptualization of the issue or reorient how they're thinking about it. So one of the most popular frames that came up within our study is invasion militaristic frame, and that refers to representing EAB as the enemy in some type of war, or using combat language like front lines, weapons, war against the enemy, or representing native species, in this case ash trees, as victims, right, or EAB as the villain. So some examples of representative quotes taken directly from some of these news articles includes, "You have to get on the problem before battle lines are fully drawn. Emerald ash borers march across Michigan to the front lines of a losing battle," for example. Other popular frame is fatalism, and that looks at the hopelessness that may be expressed about how we manage EAB, or a general lack of preparation to address the issue. So an example of a representative quote is, "It pretty much goes from tree to tree unstoppable," or "There's nothing we can do to eliminate it," or commonly, "It's only a matter of time. The chances are very high for us to lose all our ash trees, a complete wipeout." And again, these are directly from the articles. Other frame includes anthropomorphism, and this case is applying human attributes to EAB, usually as some type of antagonist, or other types of human attributes to either EAB or the native ash species. And so other examples of this anthropomorphism includes, "Many trees are falling victim," right? EAB has become a methodical killer, or southeastern North Carolina will likely be spared the wrath of the EAB. So again, using these human attributes to describe the native or invasive species. And then final frame we looked at is looking at optimism, and this is showing some general positive benefits to EAB or some hope attributed to the species. So for example, trying to find some silver lining post EAB. So one quote says, "After the devastation comes regrowth, a moment for us to pause in our planning for the future while we remember and honor those who came before us and brought us to this place." Right? And some articles are representative of optimism. And as you notice, right, some of these different, for example, representative quotes can touch on more than one frames. So in one part of the sentence or paragraph, you might talk about fatalism, but on the other side, you might also express some hope, for example, but now we're seeing all of these endangered woodpeckers that we didn't see before. So looking at the trends over time, starting in 2002, right, till 2017, we see that there's been a general increase in invasion militaristic frames and fatalism as well, right? And it starts to taper off around 2014, and that is partly due to the fact that many of the articles also started tapering off around that time, which could be a result of the fact that EAB has lost the shock value, right, that is usually represented in many news articles. So transitioning a bit to looking at representation and whose voices are most heard in these reports and news articles. Overall, majority of the articles use expert opinion. In fact, all the articles that reported an information source included experts. And within those experts, majority of them were government agents, including extension agents and other state representatives. Only 12% of the articles included anything from the general public. And the 12% usually focus on the emotional toll of losing ash trees, or in some cases, volunteers who went out to find emerald ash borer. So despite this overwhelming use of expert voices, we see that over half of articles also included some call to action for the public. So it's common for articles to ask landowners to not transport firewood, inspect their trees, educate themselves, to donate money, adopt a tree, or other types of activities. The public has also been asked to engage in various management activities, for example, chemical control, quarantine, right, burn where you buy, cutting or removal of trees, preemptive removal, which is basically asking to remove trees before EAB is detected in that area. And particularly among urban municipalities, right, diversifying the urban tree canopy, it has come up quite frequently as a way to adapt to these types of invasive species. So this figure here shows the treatment options discussed over time. So over time, we can see an increase in recommendations for cutting or removal, preemptive removal, as well as chemical treatment. Biological treatment has also slowly increased, but within the articles, it's mostly discussed in terms of science and hope that science will find some biological agent. In this case, an Asian wasp was discovered, right, that could effectively treat EAB infestations, and so there's been mentions of that in the article, that the hope that this wasp will be released soon. So the articles also mention various negative impacts of ash trees, ranging from death of ash tree species to biological impacts, including social impacts as well. For example, ash trees are used to make baseball bats, and so that also created a loss to that industry. In some cases, miscommunication with the public or conflicts were also discussed, particularly in cases where the cities removed ash trees without having a dialogue with the community beforehand. However, we were surprised that there were some positive benefits mentioned, for example, galvanizing public support, whether in the forms of donations or support to the city itself for this hard decision about EAB management. In some cases, wildlife benefits were also mentioned, for example, EAB larvae providing a food for woodpeckers. So what are some lessons we learned here from this analysis? We found that most articles use invasion militaristic or fatalistic framing, and this is problematic partly because people may become insensitive over time. So we've seen Dutch elm disease, we've seen EAB and other types of invasive insects and invasive animals overall, and so this constant use of defending enemy lines, fighting a losing battle, urgent, top priority, over time may make people insensitive to addressing invasive species. In addition to that, presenting EAB as inevitable, right? We're going to lose our ash trees, but at the same time, presenting it as something that the public needs to do, right, is counter to what we would want, right? So it may become ineffective. And then finally, this presents an opportunity for us to engage the public, right? So all articles use expert voices. Are there some ways that we could use social influence or other social science theories to motivate the public to act, right, based on what their neighbors are doing, what their neighbors' perceptions are? And then finally, I'll end with some future questions to explore that, of course, this analysis did not get to answer. And so some of those would include, what are the preferences of the public to receive information about EAB? What would actually work for them? In addition to that, we could also look at how has this species communication changed over time. So we looked at it from the source of newspaper communication, but it would also be interesting to look at how has this changed over time within managers and how they manage for invasive species. And then finally, looking at some ways that we can adapt, right? Because invasive species are predicted to increase, especially with climate change. And so what are some things that we can do to be better communicators with the public and motivate positive behavior? So thank you so much for listening. And here's my email, and again, a link to the article with greater detail about this presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions via email as well as during the Q&A. Thank you.